Hello, everybody. My name is Michelle Sikes, and I am an assistant professor at Penn State University. My pleasure to give this NASS presentation on the suburbanization of sport, a history of the Cleveland Cavaliers Richfield Coliseum. Nick Maletti, sport mogul. With what the Akron Beacon Journal newspaper described as the, quote, dexterity and guts of a Mississippi riverboat gambler, Cleveland native Nick Maletti began his acquisition of professional sports teams in his hometown in the late 1960s. In September 1968, he purchased both the Cleveland Barons hockey team and the Cleveland Arena where the club played. He bought the NBA expansion franchise, subsequently named the Cleveland Cavaliers, in 1970. Shortly thereafter, he acquired the Cleveland Crusaders, a World Hockey Association franchise, and the Cleveland Indians, now Guardians, baseball team. Of his many acquisitions and business moves, none generated more controversy than his decision to build a massive sport and entertainment venue in rural Richfield Township, a half-hour drive south from downtown Cleveland, to serve as the home venue for his basketball and hockey teams. The 2,000-person seating capacity that Maletti envisioned would make the Coliseum one of the largest in the nation, far exceeding the Cavaliers' then home in downtown Cleveland, which had the smallest seating capacity in the NBA. That arena, built in 1937, primarily as the home of the Cleveland Barons hockey team, needed major upgrades. Akron Beacon Journal columnist Sheldon Ocker described the facility as having, quote, embarrassing locker rooms, Spartan temperature conditions, and an uncooperative floor whose surface was almost as unplayable as the oldest sections of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Visiting players complained about the venue, including Boston Celtics star John Havlicek, who commented, somebody might catch something fatal in the visiting locker room. Many NBA teams reportedly only use the arena locker room for pregame and halftime meetings, and, according to Ocker, quote, never took off so much as a shoe. Maletti envisioned the Richfield Coliseum as a major sport and entertainment hub for the region that would include boxing, wrestling, college basketball tournaments, and concerts, and would include parking for 6,200 vehicles. Quote, the finest facility of its kind in the world, promised Maletti, would be built in Richfield. The Akron Beacon Journal editorialized that, quote, Maletti couldn't have picked a better site, open land, and a crossroads for major interstate highways. Cavs star Lenny Wilkins declared, quote, I think the Coliseum will make a tremendous difference. The nicer surroundings will mean bigger crowds. I've talked to people, and they don't want to come downtown or park downtown, and the players can have some pride in the place they play. Richfield Township was then home to only 2,000 residents, but Maletti estimated the realistic market for events held at the Coliseum at 2.5 million people. He envisioned the Coliseum as the hub of a combined area that linked Cleveland with the two smaller adjacent cities of Akron and Canton within an hour's drive. We saw a need for a major league Coliseum here, and we're going to have it. This will be a facility all of northeastern Ohio can be proud of, Maletti declared. Cavaliers public relation director Bob Brown emphasized that, quote, we're not attempting to turn our back on Cleveland. Instead, we feel we are taking our product to the people. This plan was opposed by environmental groups, Cleveland politicians, the Cleveland business community, Cleveland sports fans, and many Richfield residents. Cleveland Mayor Carl B. Stokes, the first Black mayor of a major American city elected in 1967 and again in 1969, noted that, quote, the loss of the arena as an attraction is a great one for the city, and declared that he would try to persuade Maletti to change course. Detractors noted traffic, zoning, water, and sewage treatment issues, distance, and other concerns. The proposed Coliseum became the subject of multiple lawsuits, several of which were filed by the citizens organized for the preservation of our environment that took the fight through Ohio courts to the U.S. Supreme Court. Another citizen group, the Cuyahoga Valley Association, Concerned that a proposed national recreation area nearby would be jeopardized, also opposed Miletti's plans. Council members of the nearby town of Peninsula voted against the proposal, fearing their quiet, picturesque village would be split by a freeway. The proposed exodus of the home court of the Cavaliers from downtown Cleveland to rural Richfield Township coincided in the early 1970s with environmental, social, and economic decline in Cleveland. The Cuyahoga River, running through the heart of the city, had long been badly polluted and infamously caught fire in June of 1969. The negative publicity accompanying that incident and added to the challenges facing the city as it entered a period of deindustrialization, rising crime and unemployment rates, and flight to the suburbs amidst strained race relations. Cleveland's population loss began in the 1950s, and by the early 1970s, some 20,000 people were leaving annually. Over that same period, the population of Cuyahoga County, over that same period, the population of Cuyahoga County communities beyond the city's borders was burgeoning. That rapid transformation is exemplified in the chart on this PowerPoint slide. White residents abandoned the city in far greater numbers than Black Clevelanders. Quote, those who could not afford to move, a population markedly consisting of Blacks, Puerto Ricans, and white Appalachians, made up an increasingly impoverished majority of the central city, notes historian Philip Schuma. As historian Mark Souther observes, quote, Cleveland's racial climate remained tense into the 1970s. Some Black residents had moved to the suburbs, but the vast majority remained inside the central city, itself almost entirely segregated, increasingly distant from industries that were moving to the periphery. The inner city, like that in many cities, was the repository for the metropolitan area's worst socioeconomic hardships. Newly built freeways and 36 cents per gallon gas prices encouraged that exodus. Suburbanites and ex-urbanites increasingly took advantage of amenities beyond municipal boundaries and found little need or desire to travel to Cleveland, which fueled Miletti's arguments to move the venue. Quote, the departure of the Barons and the Cavaliers is in the best Cleveland tradition, a growing tradition, incidentally. Some of the most interesting attractions Cleveland has to offer are outside of town, observed Plain Dealer columnist George E. Condon in an August 1971 editorial. He continued, quote, the city's aquatic show is in a town called Aurora. The summer orchestra is in an Akron suburb. The major airport is in Brook Park. Even our city workhouse is in Warrensville, all negating the need to go downtown. One resident editorialized in the Plain Dealer, quote, I suppose the location will make arena-type events more accessible to many fans and draw the people who shun going into the central city, end quote. Professional sports teams across the nation were relocating to new suburban venues beyond the urban center, such as the Harry S. Truman Sports Complex outside of Kansas City that became home to the city's professional football and baseball teams in the early 1970s, and the Meadowlands Sport Complex located across state lines in the suburb of East Rutherford, New Jersey, housing the New York Giants football stadium. Miletti often noted the fact that the Los Angeles Lakers played their home games at the Forum, located in Inglewood, 25 miles from downtown Los Angeles. When asked why he chose to leave downtown Cleveland, he responded, quote, I don't want to get out of Cleveland in one sense or into Summit County in another. It's simply a question of which location is most convenient to where the people are. It's as simple as that. End quote. Cleveland Mayor Stokes, too, placed the relocation into a broader context of changing urban dynamics. Quote, this is the trend of every big city in the country. The land costs are so much lower, and really, the people are there. There are now much greater numbers out in suburbia than in the central city, end quote. Miletti prevailed, and the Richfield Coliseum opened in October 1974 with a Frank Sinatra concert before a sold-out crowd of over 21,000 people. The building became home to the Cleveland Crusaders, a World Hockey Association franchise, and the Cleveland Cavaliers NBA team. The Coliseum boasted state-of-the-art screens for instant replays, two full-sized practice courts, a weight room, two cocktail lounges, 10 concession stands, 11 restrooms, and 96 private loges, whose lessees enjoyed exclusive on-the-site access to tennis courts, two restaurants, and a health club. Construction that Mileti had anticipated would take little more than a year stretched to 3 years and 7 months amidst the multiple lawsuits and dozens of town meetings and petitions. At the Coliseum's inaugural event in October 74, thousands of cars filed into the black-topped parking lot next to a pasture where sheep were grazing. Quote, "A monument to concrete," declared the Akron Beacon Journal, noting that it, quote, "loomed like a squat monolith against the rolling hills of the Cuyahoga Valley." The facility contained 3,300 tons of steel and enough concrete to pave 15 miles of two-lane highway. Thousands of entertainers performed before sold-out crowds at the Coliseum during its 20 years of operation, including Stevie Wonder 2 nights after the Sinatra concert, and the following year, Muhammad Ali, who fought Chuck Wepner in a bout that purportedly inspired the movie Rocky. For more than 3 years, Mileti fought to carry out his vision to establish a major sports and entertainment complex beyond the borders of Cleveland, undeterred by politicians, business people, Ridgefield residents, Cleveland sports fans, and environmentalists. That battle over the Coliseum brought into bold relief demographic and environmental challenges facing Cleveland and other industrial cities during that era. City leaders lack the tax-derived resources to partner with Mileti to build a new arena in Cleveland. Business leaders failed to oppose the move collectively, and residents and environmentalists found their efforts thwarted in the courts. Rather than enhance the vitality of Cleveland by maintaining its professional sports teams within city limits, Mileti sought to exploit the movement of population to the suburbs. When asked whether having the Coliseum outside of Cleveland would add to the stagnation of the city, he responded, quote, "I don't know. That's not my bag. I'm not in politics. What I'm trying to do is take some sports teams, which have a great impact on an area, and give them a showplace in which to play." End quote. Some opponents of his venue took a longer-term view of the conflict. U.S. Representative John Sieberling co-sponsored the legislation that would make the lands adjacent to the facility a national park. Quote, "We have to accept the Coliseum. It's an established fact. My main concern is controlling the development around the Coliseum so it does not do irreparable harm to the proposed park," Sieberling emphasized, referring to the bucolic Cuyahoga Valley at the edge of the Coliseum site. Akron-born Sieberling, who was raised in the Cuyahoga Valley, won approval in both houses for his bill to establish a national park on the land along the Cuyahoga River between Cleveland and Akron, and that legislation was signed into law by President Gerald Ford in December 1974, 2 months after Frank Sinatra opened the Coliseum. The new Cuyahoga Valley National Park, a protected area of 33,000 acres adjacent to the Coliseum, stymied commercial development in the area around the sport complex, which barely expanded beyond the few restaurants already in existence. Convenient access to the facility remained a concern. Quote, "They promised there'd be public transportation, buses to the Coliseum from both Cleveland and Akron, but there never was," reflected Cavs coach Bill Fitch. Mileti himself later admitted, quote, "I made one miscalculation on the Coliseum, and it was a major miscalculation. I thought the area between Cleveland and Akron would fill in. I thought every intersection along the way would look like many of those in the suburbs around Cleveland," end quote. The controversial origins of the Ridgefield Coliseum expose the simultaneous social and environmental problems that Cleveland faced, from the rise of suburbia to polluted waterways. Supported by the courts, Mileti built his Coliseum in a location that he believed would best serve the wider region. That decision to relocate 30 miles from the city center mirrored Cleveland's population exodus and a broader dynamic of the suburbanization of sport. Thanks very much for your attention.